About 50 JEA employees participated in Meet Alice, a poverty simulation facilitated by the United Way of Northeast Florida. ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and 40% of Northeast Florida residents fall into this category.
That means that they're working poor.
Well, we can fix that.
They make just enough money to live, but not enough to survive. And in Jacksonville, a child born into poverty, only 1 of 20 will escape it in their lifetime. So poverty is generational.
The simulation began with each JEA employee choosing a family group and receiving a role in that family.
So I'm Ben Bowling. I'm a 42-year-old unemployed father, and currently I am trying to determine how I'm going to get food into our household with very limited transportation options.
So I'm Lauren Wiscott. I am an immigrant into the U.S. I've been here for 5 years, but I'm disabled. I cannot work on a very limited income.
Employees spent the next hour learning what it's like to live in a family that's struggling. Children went to school without breakfast. Fathers paid to ride a bus to the bank and then paid a fee to cash a check for groceries. And families juggled their meager finances to pay their JEA bill.
The utility industry is changing, so that means that prices will continue to rise. And we have to have an awareness of the impact of those rising costs on the people least able to afford to pay more than they're paying today.
In the end, employees called the entire simulation stressful and overwhelming.
Felt hopeless as I was going through simulation. I was a 14-year-old child, and I had adult responsibilities to pay the rent.
It makes me more grateful. I mean, when you think that you're going through a lot, there's families that are out there that truly are in a lot worse situations. And, you know, bringing JEA and United Way together to just go through this experience, it was a great opportunity.
Yep. Call meeting to order. Time of reflection. We have the adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Second. Comments? All those in favor by saying aye.
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 A values moment by Zach.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Zach Waldrop. I'm the manager of our pollution prevention programs team. I've been a member here at JEA, a team member, for about 5 years. My team provides environmental support for our water and wastewater operations group. Our goal is to protect our publicly owned infrastructure, promote public health and environmental health. We work towards this goal by educating our customers and enforcing our regulations, standards, and policies. For those attending in person, the safety protocol is on the screen and in your materials. For those attending remotely, please be mindful of your surroundings. Respect is a core value at JEA. We treat each other with courtesy and respect, seeking diverse perspectives and helping to bring out the best in everyone. Today, I'd like to share an example from a few years back that highlights how respectful dialogue can contribute to a successful customer interaction. My team received a report from Pearl Street about a grease-related blockage causing a sanitary sewer overflow off of 103rd. Upon arriving at the location, I discovered that the grease interceptor upstream of the blockage was grossly non-compliant with our standards and discharging grease to our sewer system. After a thorough inspection, I approached the restaurant owner to discuss my findings. Unfortunately, he was less than happy to see me or to find out about his non-compliance. He expressed that he didn't understand why JEA was involved with his business practices, especially during a busy service. Despite his frustration, I assured him that I would return at a more convenient time to discuss the matter. Upon my return, I found that the restaurant was less hectic, and I managed to engage with the owner. Despite a lingering skepticism about our involvement, I took the opportunity to explain to him how a neglected grease interceptor directly impacts our publicly owned infrastructure. I emphasized how grease discharge from his business causes blockages in our system, leading to a sanitary sewer overflow that harms nearby streams and neighborhoods. By illustrating the correlation between his kitchen practices and community welfare, I aim to educate rather than admonish. by using respectful dialogue and insights into how his business could effectively contribute to environmental and public health, he had a remarkable shift in his perspective. He not only understood, but he thanked me for showing how his business could be a good environmental steward and make a difference. I hope that this example shows how the impact respectful dialogue can have when interacting with the customers, especially in some of our more intricate situations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. At this time, I'd like to ask if any comments from the public. Public comments related to the rate hearing will be heard a little later in today's meeting. Mark Zimmerman.
So good morning. I'm Mark Zimmerman. I'm the energy manager for commercial metals. And since we're bifurcating it, I just wanted to make a comment on the last week's meeting with the Finance Audit and Governance Board. I really thought y'all did a really nice job handling that situation. I think it just shows, again, the good decision you made bringing Jay on, and his stewardship's really made a big difference on JEA. That's all I wanted to let y'all know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Council Member Michael Boland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe all of you received a copy of the legislative summary for Bill 2024-0110. I wanted to take a minute to speak to this for a variety of reasons, but not the least of which, just to reemphasize the JEA is a municipally owned utility. Section 2107, Part B of the city's charter stipulates, quote, JEA shall prepare and submit its budget for the ensuing year to the city on or before July 1 each year, setting forth a variety of items. While not explicitly stipulated, this body passed a resolution in November to give Managing Director Jay Stowe the authority to take, quote unquote, the necessary steps to seek legislative approval for a budget amendment. Bill 2024-110, where JEA is requesting the council to approve an amended budget for the fiscal year 2022-23, goes before two committees, the council next week, and then to the full council the week thereafter. I don't want to get into the numbers as you know them all too well. While I fully expect it will be approved, I am raising the matter only to reaffirm the city council's oversight responsibilities as stipulated in both Articles 14 and 21 of the city's charter. And frankly, why I'm here as a liaison traditionally. Please know that my comments in no way diminish the vital role that all of you play. Your efforts are exemplary. I'm merely trying to reinforce the message we all know all too well. As I said, JEA is a municipally owned utility. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Councilman. I appreciate all you're doing. Jay?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman Boland. I appreciate you being here today, and thank you to the board and all the folks that are here in the room or watching. Welcome to the February board meeting for JEA. I've talked to the team here, and I've talked to the board several times recently about all the things that are going on, that we're experiencing challenging times. We're asking our teams to work harder, to think and do things differently, all the while some of our team members are experiencing difficulties, really in part due to the trial that's going on down the street. I've said publicly many times that, and will continue to say, the JEA is not for sale. I want to remind the community and employees that the board has also made it very clear with their actions and their resolutions. The council has made it clear with their actions and the changes in the charter. And I think we're making decisions to be sure that that's clear every day, to be doing what's in the best interest of the community. We want to continue to provide a high level of service that's reliable and serve our community. Improving lives and building community is not just words we say, it's what I think we're supposed to be doing. So we have important things to do. There sometimes are distractions that are outside of our control. But I appreciate all of you, the employees and the board and the work that we're doing every day to serve this community. A couple of things I want to highlight. Kwanzaa Humphrey want to congratulate you for being recognized as the Jacksonville Business Journal Women of Influence honoree. So we appreciate that. We are honored that you're willing and able to serve on the board. So thank you for that. I hope that you all were some of you were able to see the Florida Municipal Electric Association Line Worker Rodeo over this past weekend. We hosted the event for the first time since 2013. It was an honor. It was exciting to be part of this. I was happy to be on the ground the whole time. I appreciate that you all do what you do every day, and we're out there supporting JEA in the community. But we have an opportunity today to recognize some of the folks that represented JEA and won some of the awards. And so I'd like to show, I think we're going to show a quick video. And then I'd like Walt Hiscox, the Senior Manager of Distribution, Construction, and Maintenance, to come up to recognize some of the participants.
Your first place apprentice winner on the Herb Man from JEA, Hunter Thomas. Fourth place overall in apprentice competition from JEA, Noah Sapp. Third place, also from JEA, Ryan Cornegay.
JEA took it home, man. I don't know. That's what we did. Safety is one of the most important things that these guys do. You know, they're working around hazardous conditions all the time to really show how important safety is, and to have JD come out and honor him and recognize him for all his accomplishments. I think that really sets the bar for all the new apprentices and all the journeyman linemen to aspire to.
Jay, and thank you to the board for giving us the opportunity to brag about our team a little bit. Very proud of what we did last weekend, and just glad to be here. So this year, JEA had the honor of hosting the 2024 FMEA Florida Lineman Competition at Met Park in Jacksonville, and I don't think that video does justice to just how cool it was to be right in the middle of the city with all that. So. Competitors from all over the state took on various challenges such as changing out fuses, replacing wires, disconnecting power lines, and completing a simulation of rescuing injured line workers. Competitors earned points for completing the task as quickly as possible and lost points if safety standards and proper work practices were not followed. Journeyman teams, which included at least one line worker who had been in the industry for 5 years or more, were made up of 3 line workers and an alternate. Apprentices, or line workers in training, competed individually. This year, 218 utility workers from 15 different utilities in Florida participated in the competition. This included 154 linemen registered to compete, consisting of 75 apprentices and 79 journeymen, and composing of 23 different teams. And there were 64 judges from across the state that scored the competitors. This year, JEA was represented by 4 journeyman teams, 8 apprentices, and 9 judges. This competition required incredible effort and coordination by the entire JEA team, and it was truly a shining example of what the talented individuals who work here can accomplish. There are too many people to thank individually, but the hundreds of people who were a part of making this happen should all be extremely proud of what we accomplished over the last several months in putting this event together. With me today are 3 individuals who supervised the building of the competition field, which was an enormous task in and of itself and was quite a sight to see. as well as my counterpart, Jerry Creel. They are Foreman Rocky Waldrop, Foreman Robert Hess, and Coordinator Kenny Lockwood. They and their crews were so impressive in with the construction of the competition field and with their support of the rival of the other teams. We wanted to make sure that they got a little special recognition for that, because that was all the behind the scenes stuff that a lot of people didn't get to see. So, also with me today are some of the JEA competitors that placed in various events, as you saw on the video, along with their coach, Scott Lefevre, and we'd like to give them a shout out for their outstanding performance. We have the journeyman team of Cody Stokes, Caleb Macrobitis, Davey Hicken, and Mike Corbett. They finished second in the mystery event, which ended up being a cross-arm edition. Apprentices Noah Sapp, who took first place in load bus tool operation and fourth overall. Ryan Cornegie, who finished in third place in secondary wire replacement and third overall. And Hunter Thomas, who finished first place in the Hurt Man Rescue and third place in the low bus tool operation. So please join me in congratulating. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. It was an exciting event. One of the things that was the most fun was to see how many families were out there with the folks competing who had an opportunity to get to see what their family members do every day. So focus on safety, but it's also focused on how we can have fun and how we can win. So congratulations to everyone that put it on too. It was a big effort. So thank you for that. A couple of other things in the past week or so, we have had a follow-up meeting with the Riverview subdivision on the septic tank phase-out program. This is the fourth of the current round of septic tank phase-out programs that are underway, and we're having people sign up for those. We're 8 or 10% towards the goal of 70%, and it's probably going to take us a couple of years in that process to get the 70% number on this. So it's a long-term project, but we're out in the neighborhood pulling this together so that we can be ready, working with the city closely on that. Where is Riverview?
It's on the north side.
North side. Okay. Thank you. The meeting today, we've got a handful of topics that we want to be able to cover. In just a minute, we'll introduce Sheridan Meek from the Florida Chamber Foundation to give us an overview of the state and local economic outlook. We have the rate hearing that is a follow-up from the several meetings that we've had over the last few months. And we will continue down the path of talking about our enterprise planning. What Julie Crawford will take a look at some of our long-range resource planning efforts. And so while this plan is not in stone, we'll be able to adjust our plan as new regulations come out, new technologies emerge. But I think it's another important step in our process of being sure to look long-term. There are a lot of things on the agenda today, so I'm going to keep my comments a little more brief and happy to answer any questions as we go through the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Jay, thank you. Sheridan Meek, thank you for coming. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Sheridan Meek. I'm the Senior Research Economist for the Florida Chamber Foundation, and I'm going to walk you guys through some of what's happening in Florida's economy right now, as well as our 2024 Florida Economic Outlook. So before I dive into the economy, I wanted to give some context to the Florida Chamber Foundation, the work we do, and why Florida's economy matters so much. So the Florida Chamber Foundation is the research arm of the Florida Chamber of Commerce. We're very focused on the future of Florida, specifically looking out to 2030. And so we do that through the Florida 2030 Blueprint. And the large goal of the Florida 2030 Blueprint is to grow Florida to be a top 10 global economy by 2030. Right now, that sounds like a very bold goal, and it is, but right now, if Florida were a country, we'd be at the 15th largest economy in the world. So when we're talking about that top 10, that's not that far off, and we've seen rapid growth in that area since the beginning of the blueprint in just 2018. As we look ahead to 2030, we keep this in the context of how fast Florida is growing. So we know that by 2030, there'll be about 2.8 million net new residents in Florida. There'll be 1.22 million net new jobs that are needed to accommodate that growth. There'll be 40 million more annual visitors per year on top of what we're already seeing. And then there'll be 2.5 million more drivers on Florida's roads. And that's usually the one that gets some groans, is there's going to be a lot more drivers on the roads and on top of what we're already seeing. So the Florida 2030 Blueprint, next slide, is organized around the 6 pillars of Florida's future economy. So these are the 6 areas that we believe are essential to securing Florida's future. You cannot have a thriving workforce without a strong talent pipeline. So we have the talent supply and education pillar. You can't become a global economy without innovation and economic development, which is one of our pillars. Infrastructure is key to fostering growth in the state, and then a competitive business climate not only draws businesses here, but also helps the businesses that are already here to thrive. And then efficient and effective government moves progress forward in all of these areas. And then finally, high quality of life supports Floridians and creates room for them to thrive. That's the foundation of all of this, is the quality of life that Floridians have. And among these 6 pillars, we have goals in each. So that overarching goal of growing Florida to be a top 10 global economy. But then we have about 6 or 7 goals within each of these pillars. And these are the very specific things that we believe are essential to growing Florida's economy. And so they span from over 80% of Florida's workforce having essential employability skills to diverse and reliable energy, water, and waste management resources, and to less than 10% of Florida's residents living in housing cost burden households. And that means that they are paying 30% or more of their income on housing. So one of our goals is to have less than 10% of Florida residents living in those households. In my role, I keep up to date with the different data that measures these outcomes. We have these goals, but we also want to know where we are and keep track on these goals. They're not just lofty thoughts and goals. We want to keep track of where we are. And so I do that through keeping track of the data and finding new data and resources to help us keep up with that. As I mentioned, if Florida were a country, we'd be the 15th largest economy in the world. Our latest annual GDP, which measures the size of our economy, is $1.44 trillion. And that's been seen a 55% increase since the release of the blueprint. And so we've moved from 17th to 15th in those few years. The top 3 private industries by their share of GDP, so what's making up that size of our economy, is financial activities, professional business services, and then educational services and healthcare. As I said, when we started the blueprint, we were the 17th largest economy in the world, and we've now increased 2 spots, and we've surpassed the size of Spain and Indonesia. And so we're slowly on the heels of Mexico. We've gone back and forth with them. We were actually 14th at one point, and then their economy grew as well. And so now we're kind of going back and forth with Mexico, and ultimately the goal is to surpass Italy. Taking a high-level look at Florida's economy, we track all of these metrics at the floridascorecard.org. So that is our online resource where we keep track of data at both the state and the county level related to all of the 6 pillars. So when we're talking about that less than 10% of Floridians being housing cost burden, we track that every year on the Florida scorecard, not only at the state level, but also at the county level, because we know that a lot of these changes in progress, not every area of Florida is the same. That's an understatement. So when we're talking about changing these things, it starts at the state level, community level, county level, and community level. So some of that high level look, as I said, 1.22 million net new jobs are going to be needed in Florida by 2030. Can break this down by Duval County. So looking at the county level, there's 61.6 thousand new jobs that are going to be needed here. Open jobs has declined. Actually, open jobs has increased. I'll touch on that. And there's 24,600 open jobs in Duval County right now and 16,200 people who are unemployed. You notice there are less people unemployed than there are jobs that need workers, and I'll dive into that as well. The unemployment rate in Florida is 3%, and in Duval County as well, it's 3%, and that's very low compared to the national level is 3.7%, and it's much lower than many other states in the country. Consumer sentiment, that measures Floridians' outlook on the economy, and it increased last month. So basically that means that Floridians have a more positive view of our economy this month than they did last month. And that's important because that influences how they spend and how they fuel the economy. And then some of the housing statistics as well, single family housing statistics specifically, we keep up to date with on the scorecard. Looking at the job market, so in April of 2021, we started to add jobs, and we've continued to add jobs every month since April of 2021 in the state. Since October of 2021, which was when we recovered to pre-pandemic employment levels, there's been a downward trend in that job growth. This doesn't mean that we're losing jobs, we're just adding jobs at a slower pace. This happened again in December, which is the latest available data. We decreased our job growth rate by 0.3% in Florida. Duval County has a higher annual job growth rate. This is the rolling annual job growth of about 3.1%. And when you look at the national level, states like California and New York, we have a significantly higher growth rate than they do. Shifting our focus to unemployment, that open jobs versus the people who are looking for work. So for every 100 open jobs in Florida, there are only 83 Floridians who are looking for work. And that's evidence of a workforce shortage. We have a very tight labor market in Florida. We've had a lot of labor market resiliency over the last few years, but that also means that we have a very tight labor market. There aren't enough people who are looking for work as there are jobs that need workers. So there's about that 83. And on top of that, there's a couple things to keep in mind. So we pull this data from online job postings, which means it doesn't even capture all the jobs that are open, as not every job is posted online. So the workforce shortage is probably even greater than what we're seeing in that 83. And also, that doesn't mean that those 83 people who are looking for work are qualified for the jobs that need workers. So we have a skills gap in Florida as well. And this varies again by county. Miami-Dade has the largest gap, 54 unemployed people for every 100 open jobs. Duval County also has a very wide gap of 66 unemployed people for every 100 open jobs. And there are some counties that have more unemployed people than open jobs. But on the whole, the story in the state is that workforce shortage. We can dive even deeper into this, as I mentioned, that skills gap. We can look at online job postings and the skills that those jobs need. So looking at our labor market needs, the top example here is nursing. So nursing is the most open job. There's the most open jobs in nursing in the state. That's also true in every county, and most states in the country, nursing is the most in-demand job. So if we look at these job postings and the skills that they're looking for, that skill of nursing is needed in just under 8% of open jobs in Florida, but only 1% of candidates are trained in it. Even if that doesn't fully reflect who's trained in it because it's based on online resumes, it does mean that people at least aren't marketing themselves in the way that they can get those jobs. We know increasingly people are getting their jobs through online job postings, so that workforce shortage could also be based on the fact that people are not adjusting to this new way of getting employment, and so we're running into issues with people finding the jobs that are needed. Next slide. So diving into looking ahead into 2024, we have some high-level predictions at the Chamber. So we expect there to be slower, more sustainable growth in Florida's economy. We expect Florida's economy to continue to grow, but at a slower pace than it has lately, the last few years. We expect there to be a small decline in interest rates in the second half of the year, stabilization in the housing market. We expect to be #1 for net income migration in the country again. We have been the last few years. There'll be population growth of about 225,000 to 275,000 residents, and then about 1 to 1.5% job growth annually. Starting with that overall economic growth, so we hear a lot of talk about a recession coming. Nationally, economists are split about if there will be one at the national level. We don't anticipate that there will be one in Florida. We believe that our GDP is going to continue to grow. It's had rapid growth over the last few years, even in the wake of expected recessions. So we expect that to continue, but it will be slower. So about a 7% annual GDP growth is what we're forecasting. That would put us at a $1.7 trillion GDP by the end of the year. High inflation is also the story in the nation, and especially in Florida for consumers and businesses. So there's been a slow decline in inflation, but that slowing inflation doesn't mean that things are getting less expensive. They're just getting more expensive at a slower pace. We're still seeing very high inflation in the country. And then when you start to zero in on it, we're also seeing even higher inflation in the southern region. And then 2 of the metro areas that are measured in Florida, Tampa and Miami, those also have even higher. Miami actually has the highest inflation rate in the whole country, the highest metro area inflation rate. So with this in mind, as we're looking ahead to 2024, we do expect there to be a cooling in inflation. You can see over the last couple of years, there's been a rapid peak in it, but it is starting to go down. However, when we're talking about, so that green line there, that yellow line, even the red one, those are well above the United States inflation rate. So even though we expect to see some cooling, you're not really necessarily going to feel that when you go to the grocery store, when you're buying a house even, because it's still so much higher in Florida than it is in other areas of the US. We do have the first statistics on Florida's inflation in January of 2024. So we saw a decline in inflation this past month, and that was led by dropping energy prices. But again, this is month to month, so they can increase next month. Energy is a little fluctuating. Food and housing especially are fluctuating. So inflation is still very high when you look at categories like food, housing, and transportation. We talk a lot about affordable housing at the Chamber, especially because it's so tied to workforce in the state, and that housing inflation is off the charts, especially compared to the rest of the country. It's not on here, but in Miami-Dade, December's inflation rate for housing was actually 8.1%. The month prior, it was 10%. So we're seeing very high inflation rates when you start to look at it by category. Shifting focus to Florida's housing market. So over the past 4 years, we've seen high prices and high interest rates, and that's leading to an increase in inventory. So there's been a boost in housing permits, and that's kind of acted as a restocking in Florida's housing market. In 2024, we expect the active listings to continue to be high, but they're going to potentially level off at a new normal. That's again and again what we're saying about 2024 is this new normal. Those housing prices or those active listings will remain around the current level. Housing prices will probably remain around the current level as well. They're not going to get too much more expensive, but they're not going to decline either. We're leveling out in our economy this year. You can look at rent as well. So rental prices have skyrocketed over the last few years, but in 2024, we also expect those to level out. Vacancies are back at their pre-pandemic rates, and that could lead to that leveling of prices. However, those big cities, those are still going to see the biggest challenges. You're not necessarily going to experience that change in rental prices or the leveling off in rental prices. They still might get more expensive in some of those bigger metro areas. Some of our larger housing market predictions, we expect the median listing price to be between $415,000 and $450,000 in 2024. And to put that in some context, in 2020, the median listing price was $250,000. So we've seen a rapid increase, over 50% increase in the median listing price. And some more context for that, even though we've seen that over 50% increase in the median listing price, the median household income has only increased 20%. So when we're talking about inflation, okay, our wages also increasing, it's not a match. There's definitely a much higher increase in housing. What was that? 2020. Yeah, so right before pre-pandemic, it was $250,000 for the median housing price, so a rapid increase. And then we also expect the median rental estimate to be between about $1,450 to $1,650. And just again, some context for that. So to be able to afford that rental cost, you need about a $62,000 income to be able to afford that rental cost. When we talk about affording, that's again, that 30% or more of your income, spending less than 30% or more of your income on housing. And right now that's only 47% of households in Florida. To be able to afford a house at that median listing price, you need $152,000 as your annual income. And that's only 12% of households in Florida. So as we're talking about this affordable housing, which does not mean subsidized housing, it just means housing that you can afford on your median income. That's becoming less and less attainable in the state. In terms of income migration, so looking at last year, we were #1 state in the country for net income migration. Florida saw an inflow of $39.2 billion in income. So when people are moving here, they're bringing their income with them. And this is on the net, so taking into account people who leave, that breaks down to $4.48 million per hour that's coming into Florida in income. As for Duval County, it's $484 million in net income migration. So about $55,000 per hour coming into just Duval County. That's number 19 in Florida based on the other counties. And if Duval County was a state, it'd be 20th in the country for net income migration. So it's not just competing within the state itself, but Florida's counties are great compared to many states in the country for the number of people who are moving into them and bringing their income. So greater than South Dakota, Vermont, Washington, and many other states. As we look ahead to 2024, something to keep in mind here is that we only lost money to 2 states. So this is for the whole state. That $39.2 billion, we only lost income to Tennessee and Wyoming. And for Wyoming, actually, if you look at the breakdown of the data, the amount of income we lost, it's only for a few tax filings. This is based on tax data. So what that probably means is that 1 or 2 really rich people moved to Wyoming. So even when we're looking at that money loss, it's not as much of an indicator, but we are looking at where we lost people to, and that's different. So we've actually lost people to 7 states rather than 2 states. And that means that on average, the people moving into Florida have higher incomes than the people leaving, but that can fuel the economy, but it also fuels higher costs in the state. So really we want to be looking at where we're losing people to, because if we're losing people to states, we're losing talent. So as we talk about that tight labor market, that's really what we want to keep an eye on, is where we're losing people to. And so looking ahead, we expect to hopefully not lose as many people to other states, but we will continue to be #1 in the state or in the country for net income migration. That's what we feel pretty confident about. So looking at population growth, we expect there to be about 225 to 275,000 new residents in Florida in 2024. We're particularly keeping an eye on the demographics of those people. So Florida does have an aging population. The age range of 20 to 65, which is over 50% of our population, we're gonna have about 60,000 people in that age range. Ages 70 plus, which is only 16% of our population, we're gonna add even more than that. We're gonna add about 70,000 people to our population. So we're seeing that Florida's population is aging, and specifically, we're actually gonna see declines in certain age ranges. So ages 9 and under, ages 25 to 35, and ages 50 to 60 are going to see declines in population in 2024. Those ages 9 and under, those are actually probably due to that ages 25 and 35. People are leaving, they're bringing their kids with them. But that 25 to 35 and 50 to 60 are really key age ranges, because 25 to 35 is new talent in the state, and then ages 50 to 60 are typically management roles, and they're the highest GDP fuelers. In Duval County specifically, there's going to be smaller age ranges that are seeing decline, but ages 30 to 34 and ages 50 to 60 are going to see declines in Duval County as well. Job growth. So finally looking at the workforce, job growth in Florida has been trending downward over the past couple of years. Still growth, just at a slower pace. So we anticipate between 100,000 and 150,000 new jobs in 2024. And that would be between about a 1 to 1.5% growth rate. We also expect to see those workforce shortages persisting. So I talked a little bit ago about those nursing skills and the amount of nurses that are needed in the state. So to illustrate that, right now there are about 12,000 nurses that are needed in Florida. There are about 20,000 nurses that are graduating from relevant programs, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to go into nursing, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to stay in the state. And that could be due to those high housing costs. But a big piece here is that retiring soon. So even though we have enough graduating to meet the need, we have 53,000 registered nurses who are retiring soon. So that's where that aging piece comes into play and why we expect there to be continued workforce shortages. So kind of the high level key takeaways. One thing is we talk about some of those challenges, especially tight labor market, a slowing annual job growth, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's more stable, it's more sustainable. We talk about slower job growth, all that kind of stuff. This still is growth. So we're still seeing Florida grow after unprecedented growth the last few years. We can't expect to see that continue. So this is more sustainable growth. And this is also an opportunity for Florida to capitalize on the infrastructure that we need and the population growth that we're seeing. How can we take this population growth and not have it just fuel higher prices, but have it fuel Florida's future economy growth? So we expect there to be, again, that 7% annual GDP growth, small interest rate cuts in the second half of the year. Expect to be #1 again in the state for net income migration, that $4.48 million per hour coming into the state. We expect that to be even more next year. About 250,000 in the middle there for net new residents in the state, but it will be an aging population. Those incredibly high median housing prices, and then an increase in listing and availability, but demand is still going to outpace supply in the housing market. And then finally, that 1 to 1.5% annual job growth. And that is all for me, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. They also have no income tax, so that could be part of it. There's probably a lot of reasons, but that's probably the biggest one.
My son did. Yeah.
And housing costs are also lower there.
Yeah.
So I thank you for sharing with us. Ted, you serve on the Chamber Foundation board. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So I represent JEA as a member of the Florida Chamber Foundation board. I'm a trustee. I think it's my title.
Any comments you'd like to make, Ted?
So no, I will. First of all, I'd just like to thank Sheridan for coming this morning and sharing with y'all what we have. We wanted to take a look at and share this information about the Florida economy. We're also working with the Federal Reserve to have someone come and speak at a later board meeting, to talk about more national basis of our economy, just to share with you what we're learning. So, and I would give one plug that they don't pay me, but one plug to the scorecard. If you would go and Google that sometime, there's really very, very interesting data. At least I feel like it is. Kept up on that scorecard that they update each month as new economic information comes in.
I will also say on top of the scorecard, we have the Florida Gap Map, and that has data down to the zip code level. So when we're talking again about that state, county, and then community, a lot of that is in the zip code. So it's a little more quality of life based. There's a lot about poverty rates, third grade reading, different education statistics, but there are unemployment rates by zip code and different industry indicators as well.
The United Way is coming out with their Alice report update, and I think last year on average there were 42% of the citizens of the state who were working but couldn't handle a crisis like needing new tires, and then early reports are they're expecting that to be 50% of the people in the state this year. So it might be wise to see what they say about Duval County and the surrounding area.
And we include that, the Alice figures on our scorecard on the quality of life pillar. So we have it at the state and the county as well.
But we will look into that and follow through. Thank you.
Sheridan, thank you. Ted, thank you for the presentation. Next, Julie Crawford. Julie, thank you for doing our JEA scorecard.
Thank you for having me. Happy to do it. Make sure I get this close enough this time. All right, I'll be going over the results of our corporate performance with y'all via our corporate scorecard. And this update includes data through January 31st. And I'm pleased to report that our strong performance from the first quartile will continue into the second quarter, or has continued. And I'll just highlight a few of these metrics. I won't go over every single one of them. For our safety metric, we had 3 lost time incidents in the month of January, and that increased our lost time incident rate for the fiscal year to 0.4. So this puts us right at the cusp of the top quartile for safety. Moving to employee engagement, our score remains at 80. However, this month we conducted our first pulse survey for fiscal year 24. So we're going to look forward to reporting those results next month. And then moving down to electric reliability, our SAIDI metric. That has been measuring above our target goal of 60 minutes, and that's putting this metric slightly at risk of achieving our target. So we'll keep an eye on that one. And then moving down to our financial metrics, the total spend in January, just the month of January, was 4% over budget. Fuel and capital expenses were slightly under, but that was offset by higher O&M costs. But year to date, we are still 8% under budget, and that is mostly due to lower than budgeted capital spend. And then our current average combined customer bill, it increased in January to $210.71, but this was met with a simultaneous increase from our peer utilities. So JEA is still ranking the lowest in terms of total customer bill and the lowest in terms of the percentage of median household income to customers. And that concludes my update, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Then I will step in for Bobby and call the rate hearing to order.
I think we're going to
do public
start with the public comments and then give the overview of the topics. And we've got two people that are here to speak at the rate hearing.
Mark Zimmerman.
I think it's good afternoon now, but thanks again for letting me comment. Just three comments on the rate case. I think first, one of the things that I don't know if was looked at, but we believe that fuel costs should be allocated based on delivery. Second item that looks at the interruptible value, given the incremental cost of new generation that JEA is bringing on, we think the cost of interruptibility should be increased also. And then finally, this is specific to CMC. We think the cost of our substation should include the amount of contributions we've made over the past 24 years.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cornell.
Yes, my name is Carnell. Our address is on file. I think one of the highlight points right now that really stood out to me from the presentation came from Ms. Meeks and the Florida Chamber Foundation. One of the biggest driving costs in our community right now is housing. And the lack of a skilled force that can have sustainable income that can address the current increases dealing with you're proposing as far as rate increase. Right now, a lot of individual residents in our community are at disadvantage. I think we need to maintain the course of the ship without even raising rates. Because until we build economic mobility for each and every last individual person, not based on the religion, not based on the culture or the ethnicity, we're putting our community at a greater disadvantage. And at this cross point, I think that we need to have a real hard conversation with the Florida legislature about we need to start cutting costs. Fundamental couple of things I'm looking at in the Florida legislature right now to cut costs for individuals. But at the same time, you've got to also be mindful of the basic infrastructure in which JEA has to provide. But right now, raising rates is not to the best interest of the individual citizen. And I want y'all to be very mindful right now. This conversation needs to be put off until 2026. And we need to really hammer down on the Florida legislature to get them to realize that we need y'all to start working for the people. Because the system isn't working. I'll use Edward Ward's College for an example. I have a vision, right? Just thinking to myself, what if we can create workforce housing? Kids that are going to school, things like that. They go through the schooling system from an economic system to give them an opportunity to get themselves in the right direction. They don't have to pay any rent whatsoever. As long as they're building themselves up, they get a fresh start. But what I'm thinking about is a Florida GI Bill, something that the military provides. We incentivize people to go to school, become economically employed, either working for JEA, working for one of our business partners like like nursing. One thing Ms. Meeks highlighted is that nursing, our rate conversation would not be so much of an issue keeping it flat if we drove up wages. If we can target key industries and create some type of program where you get subsidized housing, you get certain benefits for investing in yourselves, it's an opportunity, and I yield my time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your comments. With that, Ted Phillips.
Thank you, Chair Stein and board members. After working with you over the last several months, we are ready to make our electric rate recommendations, and I'm going to turn this over to Victor to walk through the details.
Thank you, Ted. Good morning, Chair and board. As you recall, starting back in September, we began recognizing that there was a revenue requirement that we needed to meet to match our FY24 budget. So we began those conversations back in September and looked at various rate recommendations as far as rate classes, as well as down to the rate components as you see here. So this, what you see before you, is an illustration of some of those rate recommendations. I'd like to point out that general service, large demand, which is our small commercial and industrial customers, these rate recommendations will probably impact their bills somewhere between 3 to 5%. As far as residential, you can see before you an example of a residential bill and its impacts, assuming 1,000 kilowatt hours per month. The basic monthly charge recommendation comes with raising that by 75 cents, and the energy charge is raising that by less than a penny. If you multiply that by 1,000 kilowatt hours, it will come somewhere under $3. However, you will see the total bill is only $1 increase when you compare it to December, and that's a credit to the fuel charges being lower than it was back in December, and much lower when you look a year over. So along with the rate recommendations also comes tariff revisions, which you see that's laid out before you. But we are recommending all the tariff revisions to supplement the rate recommendations. And this is all a part of continuation of our long-term rate restructuring plans.
So our recommendation this morning would be that the board approve the requested revisions and adopt resolution 2024-08 and its attachments. Those are included in your package beginning on page 99. We recommend that that approval happen at next month's board meeting on March 26th.
So in the past, we have had a rate hearing, heard public comment, and then oftentimes ask you to vote immediately, and want to be sure that you have time to take into account all the comments that you've heard and all the presentations that we've had since September up to this point, to be sure that we are being as open and transparent about this as we can. I think it's, and Victor hit on this, the important part of the lowering of fuel was not just because fuel has gone down. We've also been managing that to be able to take advantage of those decreases to help customers, so that year over year, it's even with this base increase for our residential customers, it will be a decrease in the average bill. And we also have moved the ISLD, I think those are the right letters, that we're recommending that to be effective on September 1 instead of April 1 with all the others.
Well, thank you, Victor, to you and your team. I know there was a lot of work, and we'll bring this item back with the board March 26th meeting for a board to take action. At this time, I'd like to adjourn the rate hearing and call the regular board meeting back to order. Joe DeSalvo.
Yeah, hi, Chair Stein. So let me give you a report on our Finance, Governance, and Audit Committee meeting that we had on Friday, the 23rd of February. I was joined by fellow committee members Rick Morales and Kwanzaa Humphrey, and also thank you to Chair Stein and also Vice Chair Lanahan and Board Member John Baker for attending. First item we talked about, we heard a presentation about 5 water capital projects that JEA began in 2019 and 2020. This item was on a committee's agenda because each contract ultimately exceeded the CEO's delegated contract approval authority. Each project will improve on how we handle wastewater for our customers, including, for example, the new $4 million gallon per day Greenland water reclamation facility and expanding Buckman's capacity to process biosolids. JEA staff provided costs for each project and some insights into how JEA utilizes the Construction Management at Risk, or CMAR, contracting method, and has updated procurement workflows to ensure contracts approaching $100 million are promptly placed before the board for review and approval. JEA also committed to bringing the board more information about significant capital projects in addition to what is included in the annual budget presentations. Before this board considers ratification and approval of the contracts scheduled at the March 26th board meeting, Board Member Rick Morales will closely work with the JEA staff to better understand how JEA is implementing controls for CMAR and other alternative contract methods, and how spending these specific projects align with the capital budgets over the years of construction. Next item we discussed was the JEA's disclosure policy and procedures. And each year, JEA is required to file annual disclosure reports, the ADRs, with the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board to comply with investor continuing disclosure obligations. ADRs contain financial and operating information for each of our systems and are included by reference in the bond issuance and reoffering documents. Federal anti-fraud laws apply to disclosures made by JEA in connection with bond offerings are required periodic filing. Board members, 1, may not authorize disclosure you know to be materially false or misleading. 2, may not authorize disclosure while recklessly disregarding facts that indicate that there is a risk the disclosure is misleading. And 3, must apply the elephant in the room standard, which is if you are aware of a pressing financial or operating issue, then you are responsible for knowing how those issues are disclosed to investors before authorizing the bond offering or disclosure. Steps board members can take: 1, become familiar with the disclosure document, and 2, asking questions of the JEA leadership team or staff about any disclosure of any issues that might exist. You have been provided with draft versions of the ADRs to review between now and the March 26th board meeting. They can be found at the beginning on page 459 of your current materials. These versions are nearly complete with only the appendices needed to be added. Prior to the March meeting, staff will provide final drafts that will include these appendices, as well as redline versions comparing them to the versions you received today. Staff will come back to the board on the 26th March board meeting to ask approval of the ADR so they can be filed to meet our disclosure obligations. If at any time during your review you question the accuracy of the disclosures or simply have any questions, just please reach out to Jay Stowe or Ted Phillips. And then we've got Lee Montanez briefed the committee on the internal audit charter proposed amendments that consist of updating the name of our committee, which was the Governance, Audit, and Compliance Committee, to the current Finance, Governance, and Audit Committee. Also updating the Director Audit Services title to Director Internal Audit, and deleting of an Enterprise Compliance and Risk Management Committee responsibilities. It was outdated. The committee recommends approval, and this is part of the consent agenda. And finally, Ted Phillips and the team discussed the upcoming rating agency presentation, which is a good change. We used to do this after the rating agency meetings were held, and now this will be part of today's agenda. So good meeting overall, and standing by for any questions or comments.
The only thing I'd suggest, Joe and board members, we have a workshop on these 5 items and understand more clearly what our own O&M and capital process is. We're spending $1.3 billion, and I think we've got to get a better understanding of, how we're spending money and our thought process, both short term and long term.
I'll confess that that conversation has stuck with me. That we've had really 6 events over a 13-month period, 4 before we raised from 50 to 100, and 1 shortly after we raised the thresholds. And I know we asked for lessons learned, or the committee asked for lessons learned. I just wonder if we should have internal audit and have Lee's team take a look. That's certainly what I would do with my company, is take a little bit further look into this as opposed to just lessons learned, because the reality is the work is continuing whether we've approved appropriately the process. And I think that to your point, Bobby, we've got so much spend ahead of us. We have to be not just looking at lessons learned, but we need to be looking at internal processes to make sure that we're following them. I defer that to the committee, but felt compelled to share what it's just been bothering me.
No, but this shouldn't be the committee. This should be, this is important for the future of JEA. And I want to get all board members' comments on this, because, how we push forward here, I think we don't want to micromanage the team, but we also want to feel comfortable we understand how it's being spent. So I think, Jay, we need a little bit better feeling on how, and if you believe an internal audit is necessary, let's do it. But I just want to make sure we have a roadmap on how these dollars are going to be spent. Rick?
Whether it's an internal auditor or an outside consultant, but I definitely think we need some help.
We might need both.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's just making sure some help, some assurance that we have our arms around it. And I'm looking forward to understanding the 4 projects that are, that are in progress. Where did we start? How did we get there? And so forth. I'm really interested to see that information. And I have seen the inflation. I am in the construction industry, and we've had hyperinflations, and our best laid plans of mice and men, and projects like, oh boy, this is what's going to cost. And I understand all that, but we still need to quantify it as we go and be able to document it and say, this is why, and here's where we are, and here's where we've been. I think that's the tough part with that last meeting, was we were kind of giving, here's where we are.
And approve it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, and we can't. We need to understand the roadmap.
Where I was coming on lessons learned is, I don't know what the overall spend was supposed to be, and where we are today, I don't know what the delta is. And I just think from our standpoint, I think it's as much understanding not only how we got here, which is internal auditing, a consulting firm to help us make sure we have the best practices in place to make sure. And again, I don't want to micromanage, but I also want to be smart. John, do you have?
No, I completely agree. We're all stupefied by the amounts of the money, and it's to get somebody like McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group to come in and say, what are your processes? We all get long range estimates of what the gas power plant's going to cost, and we put it in our plan and so forth. What we don't understand is what happens thereafter. We were given that we hired one firm for $500,000, obviously not to do the whole project, but to shepherd it. And it was over 100 million by the end. And what happens in between is really important, because everybody I've ever bought a plant from gave me an inflated price is an estimate because of inflation, because of, they know that you're gonna hit them. And we just gotta make sure that we're as tough as they are.
Doctor, do you have a
Hey, Chair
comment?
Stein, can I make a comment?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. One, I agree with what John, what Rick, what everybody's been saying. I'll offer this. I think once Rick is able to do his deep dive with the staff, with the JEA staff, I think that'll help organize exactly what we really need to address by priority with a follow-on workshop, or it could be workshops too. And then I think it'll make it a little bit more coherent of what exactly our being the board's ask is, and then everybody will be on the same sheet of music, because we got a lot of stuff we need to address. I think it'll take multiple workshops, but we got to be very clear on what exactly that can consist of. But I think Rick's work with his deep dive he's generously offered to do will help us focus that, so that we're all on the same sheet when it comes time for these workshops.
But to summarize, I think we want internal audit to look at what's happened in the past. Do you agree with that, Rick?
Absolutely.
And then we've got to do an RFP for somebody to look at and help us think through. And, the example I think we all want to avoid is Plant Vogel.
Right.
And what we decide today is a situation, this natural gas combined cycle plant could take 5 to 10 years, and we don't want to be in a situation is, why didn't we think about this? Kwanzaa, do you have a comment?
What I would like to add as a request to your summary is the workshop piece, and just having some insight as a director to the process. I would really like to understand how this goes, because it felt shocking, but I also, would like to recognize and just understand that there is a process to this, and what does that consist of, and how does that work? How does that play out? So then that we are able to provide appropriate commentary and oversight without micromanagement into the process. So understanding that would be, and from the procurement point as well, because that was something that really stood out to me, and being certain that there was along the entire process, fair and equitable access to the project and to the projects, and that once we were in, you weren't just locked in and then sort of being viewed as, for lack of a better term, almost a cash cow, because you can't turn your back or stop the process once it's already started.
But the 5 projects we were talking about, I think we're over $500 million. They're real dollars. And, I appreciate Rick and Joe taking this thing on, but I also think the rest of the board's got to understand where we are today and how do we move forward. So.
And we've said micromanagement a couple of times. That's our job. We're not micromanaging. I just want to make sure, it's our job. We're responsible for making these decisions. So I just want to make sure that I don't think it's micromanaging or overreaching. I think it's just us doing our jobs.
The only thing I'd make, and that's a good point, Marty, but look, we just got to understand, but we have qualified people that are out there supposed to do their jobs on a daily basis. I think we, as a board, need to understand and feel comfortable with the processes are working.
Agreed.
And any other comments?
Yeah, I'll just quickly, I share the same sentiments as everyone else. I do think that it's prudent for us, though, to do our due diligence. I get not wanting to micromanagement. To your point, Marty, we're the fiduciaries at the end of the day. And so the book does stop with us. So I think it's worth us, whether it's engaging an outside consultant, getting with our internal audit folks to take a look at this so that we are we understand fully with some granularity, as we, work through this process. So, yeah, I think we're going in the right direction.
John?
Two things. One, I want to make everybody clear that nobody is insinuating that anything improper has happened. We're astounded by the amount of money and want to make sure that we're good stewards for the city. Secondly, Rick, I thought you had more sense than to accept a job like that.
I think he was voluntold.
Voluntold.
He was voluntold, as I recall.
I'd be glad to sit with you
I appreciate that.
if you need somebody to hold your hand.
Well, thank you. I did have some good conversations with internal audit and talking about some of the postmortems that they've done of some of the recent projects, and that absolutely everything was absolutely within exactly what it should have been and proper and so forth. I mean, we're not assuming or criticizing anything. It's just to bring us something like that, we just need to understand where we are and how we got there and so forth. And I'm a firm believer in that type of delivery system and so forth. I do it every day, but I want to make sure we're asking the right questions up front to the right people and so forth. And that's where I really concerned.
Guys, thank y'all. Jay, do you have any comments?
I do. I want to be really clear that I agree with everything that has been said, that we've spent a lot of time as a leadership team talking about how to move this forward. I do think that there's at least two or three different issues that are somewhat intertwined. And so what we need to do is spend some time, and we'll work with you to figure out what the right method is. A workshop, how fast do we do a workshop, and what are the topics? We already have started working on the March agenda, and I think that will also be a time we can review some of the details of some of the history of what the alternative delivery methods, why we use that, what the value of that is, and show you how we think we're getting a good value out of that. But we also need to look at the processes that failed us to cross over the limits whenever we had approvals that went over. And then I think there's a bigger overreaching issue that you've talked about on an external consultant coming in to help us look at O&M and capital. And I think we have to get our hands around what that is so that we can explain better and more clearly what and why the O&M and capital is growing like it is. We need to get this right, not so much for the $500 million that we were talking about last week, but for the $9.5 billion that we're talking about going forward for the next 10 years. We have to get it right so that everybody is comfortable, and that's going to require us to change not only our processes of how we technically check to be sure that we're not missing some kind of approval limit, but quite frankly, how we share information with the board. We have shared all of these projects were shared with the board, but they were done in a budget package that is huge, and we didn't pull them out separately. We need to be able to pull those out separately and really talk through where those significant dollars are being spent, whether it is capital, whether it's short-term, whether it's long-term. We've got to get more information to you as we go through our budgeting cycle and budgeting process, because I appreciate you saying this. I don't think there's nothing nefarious going on, but there were a lack of controls. They weren't purposeful, but we need to fix that. We need to get a handle on O&M capital and do a little bit of education on what these alternative delivery. It looks funny. It looks odd when you see a $500,000 project turn into a $100 million project. There's more openness to that than it looks like, and there's more competition than it looks like when you see the one slide. So we'll do a better job of getting that, and I agree with everything that has been said.
One big one that I would recommend, and all of those processes are a perfect example of this. I'm sure that when y'all were looking at the Greenland Water Reclamation Plant, there was a very large budget to that, the same way as the combined cycle plant. When you have a project that has the potential of costing, used to be, 50 million, and now it's 100 million. If the overall budget of that project crosses that threshold, then the board should be notified. We are approved that we are entering into a contract at this point that is potentially going to be in excess of 50 million or now in excess of 100 million. At that time, bring it to the board, not necessarily to ratify the contract, but to say, we have crossed this threshold. The potential is there. We're probably going to be bringing this to you in the future and so forth to start. So the combined cycle plan is a perfect example. Once that RFP process really starts, and I'm sure that's something you're not just going to put out to bid.
It's on the agenda for the March meeting as well.
Yeah, so to start at that process, that's the time the board should be.
Yes, sir.
Notified of those type of projects.
We believe it may be even one more step further than that. It may be that anytime we are using an alternative delivery project, that it should come to the board to let you know. We'll work through the details of where those breakpoints are.
The timing of it is
timing of
yeah.
And we also have to spend some time. I mean, as you all are thinking about this too, we are already doing work on the combined cycle, which is preliminary work that we have to go through to get Public Service Commission approval, and so that's why we're bringing it to you next month, is so that you can be aware along the way of a project that, an individual project that might dwarf the ones we've already looked at. It's $850 million that we're looking at needing to spend to be able to put that combined cycle in place. And we can't come to you after we've spent $99 million and say, hey, now we need you to approve more. And it doesn't need to be just buried, which is I don't mean that we buried anything. It doesn't need to be in the packet of information so that we can say, it was in here. You should have seen it on page 1,412. That's not good enough, and we need to get it out in front of you more. And so we're committed to do that. And I appreciate y'all's comments.
Well, I'll say a couple of things. One is, I think John's comment that there's nothing that concerns us. I just think we don't understand where we are. And it's not just $100 million projects, 50 million. It might be a $5 million project. Again, when I was talking about micromanaging, I just want to make sure that we as a board don't wake up one day and say, oh my God. And, you talk about this combined cycle plan, is there a partner we could have? Is there other ways we can look at that $800 million situation? We talk about, there's a lot that needs to be done here to make sure. We talk about we're not for sale. We're not for sale, but I think everybody around this table is focused on being the best of what we do, because we have a commitment to our community, number one. We have a commitment to JEA and the employees. And I want to make sure we are doing as good a job as a board, and the executive team's doing as good a job as possible to make sure that we don't look up and start talking about we're not for sale. We're not for sale, but we've got a fiduciary to be best in class. And I think, and I take responsibility here. I think we can do a better job as a board to make sure we are best in class. And the onus is on us. The onus is on the executive team to be thinking every day, our attitudes, our thought process, to make sure when we walk out of here, we can look at our citizens who are our shareholders and say we've done a great job. Any other thoughts? Joe, thank you so much. With that, I'll hand it over to John Baker.
Yesterday, the executive committee met in accordance with Article 21 of the JEA Charter and the JEA bylaws. The executive committee consisting of myself, Bobby Stein, Marty Lanahan, and General Joseph DeSalvo, met yesterday to review the slate of officers for the next year. I also thank board member Rick Morales for attending this meeting. the committee came to a consensus to nominate the following slate of officers. General Joseph DeSalvo, Chair, Rick Morales, Board Vice Chair, and Kwanzaa Humphrey, Secretary. We'll bring this item before the board for action at the March 26th board meeting, and then the new slate of officers will take effect on April 1st. That concludes my report.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
I'll admit my mistake. Yesterday, I'll be sitting in the penalty box. I misspoke of Kwanzaa's name and yeah, but I think this group of people will do a fantastic job moving things forward. And I'm excited about the new leadership team. And, you know, I know Joe is in the sunny state of Maine right now, but we're going to get him home, and we'll look forward to his leadership pretty soon. Any other comments on that? The consent agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Rating agency presentation.
All right, I'm up again. So as General Salvo spoke earlier, we did give a presentation to the Finance, Governance, and Audit Committee on the rating agency presentation that we plan to have the middle of March with the 3 separate rating agencies. There were a few questions that came up during that meeting, and so we thought we would, Joe's going to address those. Since most of you were at the meeting last week, we're not going to go through every single slide that we went through, but did want to make sure that if there were any other questions, we also address those. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Joe.
Thanks, Ted. Good afternoon, Chair Stein and JEA board members. We do have a slide on the table of contents, which is instructive. We do this every year. We have an intro. Chair Stein will introduce the JEA staff and himself and talk a little bit about the community, the economy. Raynetta will then get into the financial presentation that we presented in front of the FG&A committee last Thursday. Raynetta Marshall will then do an overview of each system, both electric and water, and then we'll close with a statement that we believe that each system should be rated higher than it currently is. So we believe some of the rating agencies are beginning to understand our position. We do have a positive outlook from Moody's, for instance, for an upgrade. Believe that the water system supports AAA ratings and that electric should be AA rated. So the questions, a couple of questions. First of all, from Chair Stein, do we specifically debt finance a water project, say Greenland, the water reclamation facility? The answer to that is no. We have a number of concurrent projects underway, and through our financial forecast, we will identify a suitable debt level for new money. And again, this is new. During my tenure here, since we have not issued new money, I believe dating back to 2012 for the water system. We just did a new money bond issuance that closed this month. We'll identify an amount, and then we'll identify specific assets that we financed for IRS purposes that support that was capital. So it's more of a macro level of financing. And initially, we'll bridge finance much of this capital under our revolving credit facility. And then we'll take that out over time. Our bonds are revenue bonds. They differ from investor-owned utilities that issue first mortgage bonds that have a pledge on all of their assets. In our case, it's a pledge of our net revenues that support the bonds that we issue. Secondly, Councilmember Morales asked about the self-insurance. We're delighted that you look back into the reserve report, which is probably on page 300 of this package, because in fact, Randall Barnes was scratching his head as to what the source of your question was. It's a quarterly reserve report. We've carried that self-insured a reserve since 1992, $10 million. I don't believe we've ever touched it, at least not in the last 15 years that I could find information for it. But we do carry transmission and distribution property insurance. And so many utilities here in Florida, I don't believe Florida Power and Light, for instance, can insure their transmission and distribution system. We have $15 million of coverage. FEMA actually requires us to go out and seek that insurance every year to the extent it's available as a first line of payment for damages. And then they would come in after the insurance is drawn on. So we have drawn on that insurance. There have been 5 hurricanes since dating back to 2016 and Matthew, where we've actually had some claims. The deductible's $5 million. So the last couple of storms did not get to $5 million, but several of them did. That's the first line of payment. And then FEMA and the state come in. FEMA pays 75% of the remaining claim, and the state pays 12.5%. So 7/8 of our total damages after insurance are paid by FEMA. And that is solely for the benefit of municipal utilities. Investor-owned utilities do not have that coverage. Over that period of 6.5 years, FEMA has reimbursed us approximately $22.5 million. There's another $14 million that's still in outstanding claims that have not been paid. But we continue to hawk them. E&Y, a different arm of E&Y, represents JEA, and they also represent the city in monitoring, validating, auditing claims. And E&Y does an annual audit of this grant money, FEMA grant money, every year. And we're required to provide that as well. So I hope that.
Yeah, well, it just surprised me it was so stable for so long. And that's why I kind of question it, because I know the cost of everything is, we had the briefing from the economist, and so everything keeps going up.
If you see, we self-insure for our medical claims as well. That fund has been moving up, but we're required, if you self-insure by Florida statute, you're required by formula to have a certain amount in that self-insurance fund.
Right.
And so you'll see activity there, but with the property insurance, it hasn't moved.
That's right. It kind of jumped off the page at me.
It was a great question.
This will be Joe's last presentation to the rating agencies, and I just want to compliment Joe for every time we have the benefit of Joe's reputation in front of these rating agencies. Have done a terrific job. And I know at some point.
I'll still be out next February.
Huh?
I'll still be here next year.
Oh, good. So I don't want you to go too early, but I just want.
I love it.
I want to compliment Joe for everything he does and how much of a benefit he does give us in front of the rating agencies, which makes a huge difference. I think our balance sheet, the way we run our business is important, but they do trust Joe, and Joe, I appreciate all the work you and Ted, I appreciate you and your team and all the work you do.
We've got a great team led by Ted.
Yeah.
Well, Joe does have a wonderful reputation. When word got out that I was coming to Jacksonville,
all the rating agencies called me up and said, "Oh, you're going to love Joe Orfano." And they were all correct.
The only problem he's got is he's a frustrated Notre Dame fan. Yeah. A Plant Vogel update.
So that's me again. So Unit 3, as you know, has been up and running for almost 7 months and is performing very well. Unit 4, we're still a few weeks out from bringing that completely online and getting power from that. But that's looking very promising as well. Joe, do you have any other details you'd like to share?
Yeah, some good news. Unit 3 is actually operating north of its nameplate capacity. The nameplate capacity is 1,102 megawatts. During January, it operated at about 1,130 megawatts. So our approximate 9.35%, Jay says 9, but 9.35% share, that's another 3 megawatts. So that's some good news. We're also cautiously optimistic. There's 4 similar first of a kind Westinghouse reactors in Sanmen, China. 3 of the 4 are operating in the 92 to 93% capacity factor range. The 4th unit's in the low 90s, but MEAG's long-range forecast is built on 90%. So we think there's some upside in terms of the power that's going to be generated from these units. I'll offset some good news with a cautious news. They've encountered a few startup issues with Unit 4, namely a reactor coolant pump had to be replaced. If you saw pictures of how they were able to do it, it's phenomenal. That basically tearing apart part of a reactor and reinstalling a new coolant pump was an astounding project. With these delays, they expect to sync either today or tomorrow to the grid. And then within service, we said March, early April. It's moved to early April. But good news there is that contingency funding is on hand to accommodate any cost increases into the second quarter. And I don't believe there's going to be an issue meeting the end of the second quarter. In fact, early April is on target right now.
The difference between the 90% that the model shows and a 92 or 93 or even 94 is significant because the fixed cost that we're having to pay stays the same. And so the higher that number gets, the the less expensive it is. Not more affordable because it's expensive, but it helps the system and it helps us run better and more smoothly. We'll pull some data between now and the next meeting to show why it's important for that to be as high as it can be and how much better that is for us.
And on a final note, happy to say MEAG reimbursed us for approximately $3.4 million of production tax credits in January and have begun to give us a credit for PTCs on production with each monthly invoice going forward. So happy to say we're getting a small benefit against the cost of the units.
What's PTC?
Production tax credits.
Okay.
It's 1.8 cents per kilowatt hour. It's based on production, and we're sharing half of that with the MEAG cities. And there's a small haircut because they're being sold to Georgia Power. Because Georgia Power can use it. We can't use it as
That's what I was going to ask.
PTC.
Not a you.
So they've monetized those credits through an agreement with Georgia Power.
Well, guys, thank y'all. Appreciate it. And long range plan, Julie Crawford again.
Let's try this now. All right. So today I'll be presenting our long-range resource plan.
Julie, can you speak up just a little bit? Yeah.
Yes, and I'll get this closer. So last month, we introduced a new enterprise planning process with the goals of ensuring alignment with our strategic direction, making sure our assumptions are consistent, and prioritizing our resources. And then after that, we presented our first strategic plan, our long-range financial plan. And then today, we'll be presenting our long-range resource plan. I want to note that this resource plan that you're about to see is aligned with the integrated water resource plan that was presented way back in November of 2020 with the adjustment for Senate Bill 64. It's also aligned with the electric integrated resource plan that was presented in March of 23. And this resource plan was used to inform the financial plan that you saw last month. So really trying to ensure alignment. So first we'll give a brief recap of the electric IRP. The board approved the goals you see on the left at the April 2023 meeting: 35% clean energy, retiring less efficient generation, reducing carbon, serving our facilities with clean energy, and offsetting electrification demand with energy efficiency programs. And then we got a little more specific and passed a resolution in September 23 with the commitments you see there on the right-hand side. Planning for the future, that's one of our strategic objectives. Making sure that we are planning in alignment with our strategic direction. The next on there is deepen customer and community engagement, which is also one of our strategic objectives. And you can see the various commitments we have underneath that, but I think the one that's the most broad and encompasses most of those items is balancing reasonable rates, sound business decisions, assessment of technologies, and environmental stewardship. We also committed to provide regular updates to the board and community, so we are doing that today. And then developing an integrated planning process and updating our IRPs on a regular basis. So we will dive right into our electric capacity plan. You can see our capacity by generation type there in the bars. And then the lines represent our net winter peak demand. So the solid black line is our actuals for 22 and 23. And then the hashed black line is our projection for the 10-year window. And then right above that, you can see the red hash line. That's our projection plus 15%. That's our reserve margin required by the Public Service Commission. So you can see we have planned enough capacity to serve the demand plus 15%. And then I'll draw your attention down to the light blue bar that represents Northside 3. And you can see in 2030, that's replaced with the gold bar. That's our new combined cycle that we've mentioned a few times in this meeting. And like Jay said, Ray and her team will be coming in March to do a bit of a deeper dive into that and where we are in that process. So moving into energy mix, this is energy either produced or purchased. And we walk through the timeline. You can see our 2023 actuals there on the left. Then 2030, which is our benchmark for our goals, and 2034, the very tail end of our 10-year planning horizon. So I'll draw your attention to 2030 first. If you add those two green slices together, you get to 35%. So we are slated to meet our goal of 35% clean energy by 2030. And we are doing that with the nuclear slice, which is our purchase power agreement with MEAG for Plant Vogtle. And then the dark green slice, the renewable energy. Currently, those are purchase power agreements for solar. We have signed two, I believe both happened in 2023, one with TEA to purchase FPL Solar Energy, the other with FMPA. And then we're finalizing the one with Florida Renewable Partners for the four solar sites that has been presented to the board as well. So we're really working towards achieving that 35%. And then if you look out to 2034, the very last year in our 10-year planning horizon, we maintain the 35% clean energy. But I will note the 6%, that is an empty piece of the pie. If we go back to what the models presented for the electric IRP this last time that we calculated it, I think that would have recommended solid fuel in that slice. But we have made a commitment to explore lower carbon alternatives. So in the interim, we will be having, I know it says 2 IRPs, but we'll actually have 3 integrated resource plans before 2034. We'll conduct 2 between 23 and 30, and then another one between 30 and 34. So we will really make sure that we are focusing on that and making sure we make the best decision for our community.
Stop, 1 second, Jay, I've been thinking a lot about this, is how do we know, from a board's perspective, what is the right energy mix? How do we know, what our base loads are today and what is the future of those? I mean, this is something that, well-meaning people decided to go forward with this nuclear plant. And we found ourselves in a position, but we're going to be making some big bets. And how can we feel comfortable that the bets we're going to be taking are smart bets? I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Well, I think a couple of things. First is the reason that we have put together the team that Julie's leading on enterprise planning that is every day thinking about what the long-term plan is, not just from resource mix that we're talking about today, but how does that affect our finance and our financial plan, and how does it fit within the larger goals that we have in place. And then we do a deep dive, we've said every 3 years, into the integrated resource planning work that will help define that. So this last IRP was completed, and what came out of this is the least cost alternatives based on the decisions that we put in place to calculate that. And we have to keep on bringing this to you. So this will be an annual update that we'll provide to you on our resource plan, both on electric and water. In between now and 2026, we'll put together another electric integrated resource plan. And each time we do that, we have to bring that back and have conversations with you. So I think that's.
But Jay, and I'm thinking about, you guys are doing this every day. We're outsiders trying to make sure that we have a fiduciary, that we're thinking through this the smartest way we can. How do we get comfortable that we're making the best decisions we can? And I just want you guys to think through, and it might be an outside firm to help us think through this, but we're making multi-billion-dollar decisions here. And, you guys are bringing something to us, and it's pretty thought through, but we have no basis to make sure we're making the right decisions, other than the fact that this is what you guys agreed to. And I'm not saying that you guys aren't thinking through this, spending the time talking to the smartest people, but we're in a situation we're going to be making big decisions here.
Yes, they're big decisions, and we're putting a team on it that's working on it every day. And the last time we had outside consultant to help with the integrated resource plan, and we'll continue to use the outside resources and present those to you. It's also part of the reason that we went through the not just information with the board, but we had input from the public in that integrated resource plan to be sure that we set those goals and targets appropriately. And so that's what we'll do the next time through as well. Right now, we have targets that we're shooting for 2030. We have a integrated resource plan that shows different scenarios out to 2042. But we need to update those. And I believe the next integrated resource plan will be very focused on the timeline between 2030 and 2040. So the 2030s, whenever we decide what should that mix be. This is what it looks like right now. As new technologies come, as we see new changes in the marketplace, and as we deal with transmission, I think we'll be able to bring more information to you. And it's a combination of the team that Julie leads, the team within Ray's area and Pedro's area and Ricky's area on electric, to be able to bring the things so you have the best information available to make the best decisions that we all can moving forward. So I think that today is part of that effort to be sure that we get things out in front of you as often as we can.
Any comments from anybody else?
Help me remember, if I'm remembering correctly, when you did the ERP on electricity, this committee may have come voluntarily, but we weren't part of that process formally. It was, all the outside folks. And I'm wondering, I think I remember that you shared the decision-making process of why build a combined cycle plant in 2028 as opposed to doing something else. And if any of that data is around, we could put it in the appendix, and maybe that would be very helpful to us to refresh.
Absolutely. We'll be sure to get that back to you. The only thing I would challenge is I think you were involved in the process because we talked through this at several meetings, several of the board meetings during the year, 18 months that we worked through. We also had 8 or 10 of the individual meetings with the community. But we'll absolutely be sure that we get the package back in front of you that has all the details, that has both the long-range scenarios and the background on how we got to the goals that we're shooting for 2030. So we'll absolutely.
I think we can also include this in the agenda item for March, because we're going to be coming to the board with the process for the combined cycle. And we can also go over background on how we got to that point.
Thank you.
Thank
The one thing I'd say is I hear we listen to the community, Jay, and I respect that, but it's going to be our responsibility to make these big decisions. And I just want you to think through, is there somebody that can help us validate this to make sure that we've had, all the information we can to make these decisions? I mean, you talk about you're moving forward with the combined cycle plan. Are there partners that we can look at? Are there other things that an expert can help us? Not that we have to agree with them, but I come back to the nuclear Vogtle plant that we spent, it was a decision that was well-meaning, and staff brought forward with very good information, I would bet. And we ended up in a situation that, this thing was way over budget and way over time. I just want you to think through that.
Okay. We will.
Does the Energy Authority analyze, obviously a key part of this decision is the price of natural gas. And I would assume that they weigh in on that pretty heavy over a long-term period of time, because that's geopolitical and everything else.
It is. They do have forecasts, and it's part of the package that we have forecast on what, not just natural gas, but what the price of coal and petcoke and what's going to happen with nuclear. So all of those forward-looking curves are in the calculations that we do whenever Julie and her team run these numbers. And then for the IRP, Black and Beach helped us with this, but T is involved, integrated with the work that we do on a daily, both short-term and long-term information. Yes.
At Black and Beach we also got T's involvement with the IRP, so that they also vetted the Black and Beach assumptions and projections. So they worked with us on the IRP as well, the Energy Authority.
And one of the things that we'll talk about at the next board meeting when we talk about the combined cycle is some steps that we went through to get the indicative pricing on what it might look like if we didn't build the plan, if we were partnered with someone else. And we're going to continue to have discussions with this. Some of these things have to run parallel so that we can make the best decision we can going forward. So should it be a plant that we build, if we do that, that would need to be built at Greenland. And so that's the path we're going down. The Public Service Commission requires some steps in the process called need for power that we're going to walk through at the next meeting that also opens the door for other options. And so we'll review some of the questions I think that you're asking about specifically around the combined cycle that needs to be built by 2030 at the March board meeting.
All right, moving on to the water system. Our water system is evolving. I know this is a bit of a rudimentary graphic showing the process of how we supply water, but I thought it was important to go over how we currently do it and then talk about some new things that are in the plan. So the top line is currently how we supply water, draw water out of the wells, treat it, send it to our customers, reclaim it and treat it. Some of that is discharged in the environment and some of that is returned to our customers in the form of reclaimed water for irrigation. But the new item here is purification. And so what purification is taking that reclaimed water, treating it, and then using it for aquifer replenishment. And this is one of the main items in the recommendations from the Integrated Water Resource Plan for water supply. We do have a purification demonstration facility slated to be in service fiscal year 25, I believe. But 3 other facilities are in the 10-year plan. So we do have that currently in the plan, but it's not just a water supply solution. It is also our main tactic to comply with Senate Bill 64.
But for Senate Bill 64, would we do a purification?
We would still be doing purification for water supply, yes.
That's important. The Water Integrated Resource Plan was completed before Senate Bill 64. And I think Ray can probably answer this a little bit better, but it was really tied more to aquifer replenishment to control how much water access we had.
That's correct.
I said she could answer the question, and then I answered the question again.
Yeah, the idea of water purification preceded Senate Bill 64 by several years. We think that this is a good use of the resource to replenish the aquifer, just like Jay said, which will help us going forth in the future. So what Senate Bill 64 did was basically accelerate some of the projects that we had and also move towards, as you see there in Julie's chart, more towards disposal or discharge versus replenishment. But we had the idea of, as far as purification, as other utilities have as well, prior to Senate Bill 64.
It may become more clear on a couple of the next charts that show what the consumptive use permit looks like.
Yes. It is this next slide. So this represents our water supply. There are a couple different measurements on this slide, so I'll walk through them one at a time. And we actually supply water to our customers through 139 wells, and that would have made this graph very, very busy. So we've broken it up by grid instead. So I'll draw your attention to the lines in the middle. Those are our projected demand for water on an annual average daily flow measurement, and that's exactly what it sounds like, average annually. The solid black line is actuals for 22 and 23, and our projection is the black hashed line there in the middle. And then you can see that in comparison to the orange hash line, which is our consumptive use permit limit. And that is the limit of aquifer withdrawals within our permit. And the two lines do converge in 2031. And that is also when our consumptive use permit expires. So we will be working with the Water Management District on that new consumptive use permit well in advance of 2031. I'll next draw your attention to the height of the bars. Those are measured on max day capacity. And that is also exactly what it sounds like, the capacity to serve on a max day. That is how our water treatment plants are permitted based on max day capacity.
A consumption use permit, we would get what kind of extension?
I'm going to defer to Ray for that question.
Our current CUP is a 20-year CUP, but the days of 20-year CUPs or consumptive use permits are gone. So we would be looking for something more akin to a 10-year CUP.
Okay, thanks.
So looking at the height of the bars, you can see our max day capacity by grid, and look at that in relation to the dotted line at the top. That's our projected demand based on max day. And so just looking at this chart, it seems like we have more than enough capacity to serve that demand. But what you cannot see on the chart is location, and that is very, very important when it comes to water supply. For example, a very high demand on the south side of town. It's very hard to meet that need with a well on the north side. So location matters. So we focus very hard on getting the right resources in the right places. So moving to water reclamation, only one unit of measure on here, annual average daily flow, because that's how our water reclamation facilities are permitted. And you can see there that we actually, well, you can't see, we have 11 water reclamation facilities in service right now. I've called out the main 5 and then lumped everything else into other. And you can see as time goes on, we're adding three new water reclamation facilities, and then we are expanding Nassau, Southwest, and Blacksburg throughout the 10-year horizon. The first water reclamation facility that will come online is Greenland, that we've spoken a lot about. And I just learned the fun fact that that is the first water reclamation facility in Duval County in 45 years. So that's a little tidbit to know. And that's going to come on, slated to come online in 2025. Then moving to reclaimed water, you can see our projection for reclaimed water capacity on this chart, also an annual average daily flow. And then in that 2025, if you look in that other, you can see that bump up, that's Greenland coming online. But really, when you look out over the 10-year horizon, we are more than doubling our capacity to serve reclaimed water. So that's not just to serve our customers with water for irrigation, that's an important thing, but that is also the source for those purification facilities that we talked about previously. So it's impossible.
On reclaimed.
Yes.
And so forth, obviously, all new subdivisions and everything has reclaimed. Is there any effort with the city and so forth, or with the JEA to getting reclaimed back into some of the older infrastructure neighborhoods and so forth? When you are putting in new water lines, are you putting in reclaimed lines on the mains?
I'm not aware of any activity.
So the cost is very high.
So it's just the new stuff. Yes. Okay. Just curious.
So it's pretty impossible to do long-range resource planning without looking at pending regulations. And so we've put 4 notable regulations here on the slide, but these are just 4 of a long list that Laura Shepis' team keeps an eye on for us. And I'll just run through them very quickly. The first is the EPA proposed revision to the greenhouse gas regulations beginning in 2030. This could impact our Northside Units 1 and 2, Brandy Branch, but it could also impact the permitting and construction of the proposed combined cycle. This is not currently in our plans, not in our financial plan or our resource plan, but we're keeping an eye on it. The next one is also electric. It has to do with electric reliability, and that's at the federal and state levels that would regulate reliability and reserve generation. Once again, not included in our plans right now, but could require additional investments. So also keeping track of that one as well. The third we've mentioned several times, Senate Bill 64, that was enacted in 21, absolutely included in our plans and our financial plans and resource plans, but we continue to pay attention because the regulations are still unclear. And I think we've mentioned a few times previously, the timelines are very, very difficult. So we continue to monitor that. And if that ends up changing, we'll update our plans. Last but not least, I cannot say this word, so I'm going to call it PFAS like everybody else does. And those are synthetic chemicals. The first regulation is a drinking water standard, but we do not anticipate any impact to JEA for that. We are investing in testing, but don't anticipate an impact from the drinking water. However, we do think wastewater will follow that in the next 2 to 3 years. So what we're doing is we're working with other utilities to ensure that that regulation will account for the source of the PFAS and not just penalize the utilities. And this one is also not included in our plan just yet. We're just monitoring. So what comes next? We will continue to work the plan as shown and continue to execute and adjusting, revising, aligning as needed. We'll be submitting our 10-year site plan to the Public Service Commission by April 1st, and we'll include that report in your March board materials. We'll also be bringing a fuel and purchase power plan at a following board meeting. And then, of course, plans to conduct future water and electric IRPs. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions?
A lot of balls in the air.
Huh?
A lot of balls in the air.
We got a lot of balls in the air. Yeah. Julie, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Thoughts? It's time the meeting's adjourned.
Oh, yeah.